The more you withdraw, the more he realizes what he's losing. People always crave what they can't have. It's human nature. The moment something becomes scarce, its value skyrockets. Think about it. When something is in abundance, people take it for granted. They assume it will always be there. But the second it's gone, the second it's out of reach, suddenly it becomes desirable. This is not just about relationships. It's a principle that applies to life itself. Consider the way luxury brands operate. They don't flood the market with their products. They don't make themselves too accessible. Instead, they limit availability, create exclusivity, and ensure that only a select few can get their hands on what they offer. This scarcity creates a demand. People want what's hard to get. They long for what they feel they might lose. It's the same in relationships. When you are always available, always giving, always there, the other person subconsciously assumes they don't have to work for your attention. They begin to think that no matter what they do, you'll always be waiting. And because of that belief, they stop appreciating your presence. But the moment you pull back, the moment you stop making yourself so accessible, something shifts in their minds. Suddenly they feel a void. They feel the absence of what they once took for granted. And that absence forces them to reassess your value. It forces them to look at what they had and question why it's no longer there. This is why the cold shoulder effect is so powerful. It interrupts the pattern. It disrupts the cycle of complacency. It sends a signal that says, I am not something you can take for granted. If you don't value my presence, you will feel my absence. This is why people who master emotional control always seem to have others gravitate toward them. They never beg, they never plead, they never overextend themselves. Instead, they create an aura of mystery. They know that being scarce makes them more attractive. When you stop answering every message immediately, when you stop being the one to initiate every conversation, when you stop going out of your way to accommodate someone who doesn't reciprocate, that's when they start to notice you more. That's when they start questioning why your attention is no longer fixated on them. Scarcity forces them to wake up. It forces them to recognize what they are losing. If you've ever experienced someone suddenly acting more interested after you pulled away, it's not a coincidence. It's a psychological trigger. People value what they must work for. They appreciate what isn't easily handed to them. The problem is, most people operate out of fear. They fear that if they pull back, if they stop chasing, the other person will move on. But that's not how attraction works. Desperation pushes people away. Independence and self-respect pull them closer. Look at any situation where someone has walked away with dignity, without begging, without pleading, without trying to force someone to stay. What happens? The person who left with their confidence intact becomes more attractive in hindsight. Their absence creates longing. Their silence speaks louder than words. The other person starts to remember their best qualities, starts to feel the emptiness they left behind, and suddenly they can't stop thinking about them. That's the power of scarcity. On the other hand, when someone is constantly available, constantly seeking attention, constantly trying to prove their worth, the opposite effect takes place. They become predictable. They become ordinary. And nothing about them creates urgency. The other person knows, consciously or subconsciously, that no matter what they do, this person will always be there. And so they take their time. They don't prioritize them. They don't feel the need to act. The truth is, people need to feel a sense of loss before they can appreciate what they have. If someone never experiences the discomfort of your absence, they will never fully value your presence. The reason so many people struggle with this is because they have been conditioned to believe that love means giving endlessly, sacrificing constantly, and always being available. But true attraction doesn't work that way. It thrives on a balance of closeness and distance. It needs moments of separation to create desire. This is why people who are confident in themselves never overextend. They don't chase. They don't beg. They understand that if someone truly values them, they won't have to constantly prove their worth. They know that their presence is a gift, and they won't waste it on someone who doesn't appreciate it. The moment you stop trying so hard, the moment you stop making yourself overly accessible, the moment you create scarcity, everything changes. When you stop seeking validation and give the cold shoulder, he starts chasing. It's a shift in power. Human psychology is built on a principle of pursuit. What we have too easily, we don't appreciate. But what we have to work for, we treasure. This is where psychological reversal comes into play. It's a phenomenon that occurs when one person's withdrawal creates an imbalance, forcing the other to lean in. At first, he may not even notice. He may assume it's temporary, that you're just playing a game or waiting for him to return on his own time. But when time passes and you remain unbothered, something strange starts to happen in his mind. The shift begins. Where once he felt secure in your attention, now he feels uncertainty. Where once he believed he had control, now he feels the control slipping away. And the more uncertain he feels, the more he begins to crave what he thought he had. The psychology behind this is rooted in a deep human need for security. When someone feels they have access to another person's time, energy, and attention at will, they feel no urgency to reciprocate. They take that presence for granted because they assume it will always be there. But the moment that presence disappears, the mind enters a state of discomfort. It starts questioning. It starts wondering. It starts craving the reassurance it once had. This is why the shift in power is so effective. You don't have to do anything drastic. You don't have to be cruel. All you have to do is redirect your energy. Stop seeking, stop chasing. Stop being the one who initiates every conversation, who asks all the questions, who keeps the connection alive. When you stop, the dynamic flips. Now he's the one wondering why the energy has changed. Now he's the one checking his phone, waiting for your message, feeling the emptiness that your presence once filled. People often mistake emotional withdrawal for manipulation, but in reality it's about balance. If one person is always giving, always showing up, always making the effort, while the other is relaxed, indifferent, or even dismissive, then the relationship is already unbalanced. Psychological reversal is about restoring that balance. It's about shifting the scales so that he feels the need to step up instead of assuming you will always be there waiting. What makes this shift so powerful is that it forces him to confront his own emotions. When you're always available, always responding instantly, always making it easy, he never has to stop and ask himself how he really feels about you. He never has to question whether he's at risk of losing you. But when you withdraw, when you stop feeding his ego with constant attention, he's left alone with his thoughts. He's left wondering, did I mess up? Why isn't she reaching out? Is she losing interest? That moment of doubt is crucial. It's what makes him start replaying old memories, thinking about the way things used to be, feeling a void he didn't expect. And that void, that's what drives him back. When a person feels like they're in control, they don't have to act. They can take their time, knowing that you'll always be there. But when that control disappears, when they no longer feel certain about where they stand with you, they're forced to move. That's how you make them chase. Not by pleading, not by demanding attention, not by forcing interactions, but by shifting your own energy so that he has to wonder where he stands with you. And the mistake most people make is assuming that by being overly available, by proving their loyalty, they will be rewarded with the same level of devotion. But that's not how human nature works. We desire what is uncertain. We chase what feels just out of reach. The moment you step back and stop being predictable, stop seeking reassurance, stop giving constant validation, is the moment you trigger something inside him. He may try to ignore it at first. He may tell himself that he doesn't care, that he doesn't need your attention, that he's fine on his own, but the mind doesn't work that way. The more something is denied, the more the subconscious fixates on it. And the more he tries to push away thoughts of you, the more you occupy his mind. Psychological reversal isn't about tricking someone into missing you. It's about understanding that true attraction is built on polarity. When you were the one seeking, he had no reason to move. But now the energy has shifted. Now he's the one feeling the absence. Now he's the one wondering what changed. Now he's the one realizing that your presence was never something he should have taken for granted. The moment you stop reacting emotionally, he starts questioning everything. Silence speaks volumes. It creates an echo in the mind, forcing a person to reflect on what they may have done wrong, what they may have lost, and why they no longer hold the power they once had. Most people underestimate the power of emotional detachment. They believe that expressing their hurt, arguing, or demanding answers will bring them clarity or closure. But the truth is, the more emotionally reactive you are, the more predictable you become. And the more predictable you are, the easier it is for him to dismiss you. People crave emotional responses because it gives them a sense of control. If he knows that a certain action of his will make you angry, sad, or desperate, then he also knows he still holds space in your mind. He knows he still has access to your emotions. But when you no longer react the way he expects, when you no longer respond to his absence with desperation, when you no longer answer his breadcrumbs with excitement, when you no longer plead for his attention, suddenly the power shifts. Suddenly he starts to wonder. He starts to question. He starts to feel a loss of control. Silence is not just the absence of words. It's the presence of mystery. It forces him to think rather than just assume. When you always respond, always engage, always make yourself available, he never has to think too hard. He doesn't have to wonder what you're feeling because you are showing him everything. But when you stop reacting, when you stop making it easy for him to read your emotions, that's when curiosity takes over. That's when uncertainty creeps in. He will wonder why your energy has changed, why you're not responding the way you used to, why you're not chasing anymore. And that wondering plants a seed of doubt in his mind. Doubt about his choices, doubt about his assumptions, doubt about whether or not he truly had you figured out. And the human mind hates uncertainty. It craves resolution. It seeks answers. And if he can't find those answers through your reactions, he will start looking elsewhere. He will start replaying past interactions, trying to decode what went wrong. He will start second-guessing his own actions, wondering if he underestimated your value. Most people assume that silence is weakness, that not responding means you're accepting mistreatment. But silence is one of the strongest responses you can give. It's a response that cannot be argued with. It's a response that forces reflection instead of confrontation. And in relationships, reflection is far more powerful than reaction. When you react emotionally, you give him validation. You show him that his absence or his behavior still holds weight. You let him know that he still has an effect on you. But when you respond with silence, when you carry yourself with quiet confidence and do not seek his approval, you strip him of that validation. You remove the certainty that he can pull you back whenever he chooses. That's when he starts to feel the discomfort of his own choices. That's when he starts to realize that maybe he took you for granted, that maybe he miscalculated your value, that maybe he assumed you would always be there, and now he isn't so sure. That doubt becomes the very thing that haunts him. the very thing that forces him to reevaluate the situation. You see, emotional detachment isn't about pretending not to care. It's about shifting your focus so that your emotions are no longer controlled by external factors. It's about recognizing that your worth does not decrease based on someone else's inability to see it. And when you operate from that place of inner confidence, your energy changes. You no longer react impulsively. You no longer seek validation. You no longer feel the need to prove anything to anyone. That change is noticeable. It is felt. And it disrupts the pattern. If he was used to getting an emotional reaction from you, your silence becomes deafening. If he was used to knowing exactly where you stood, your indifference becomes intriguing. And if he assumed he had all the power, your detachment reminds him that control is an illusion. This is why silence is so effective. It's not about ignoring someone out of spite. It's about reclaiming your power, your time, and your emotional energy. It's about shifting the dynamic so that he is the one questioning, the one seeking, the one feeling uncertain. Because uncertainty creates curiosity, and curiosity creates pursuit. And pursuit is what makes him realize that he can't just let you go. When you become emotionally unavailable, his mind starts to obsess over you. There is a certain power in no longer being accessible, in no longer being the one who is always available to talk, to listen, to give your time freely. Most people underestimate how much power they hand over when they make themselves too easy to reach, too easy to understand, too emotionally available. But the moment you shift, the moment you pull back, something profound happens in the mind of the one who thought they had you figured out. Psychologically, human nature is wired to seek what it perceives as uncertain. When something is readily available, the brain assigns it less value. But the moment that availability is removed, the subconscious mind begins to crave it. It begins to fixate on it. This is why emotional unavailability works in a way that is almost hypnotic. It draws attention. It forces a person to think about what they may be losing. At first, he may not even notice. He may assume it's temporary. He may tell himself that you're just playing a game, that you'll come back like you always do. But when you remain detached, when you show no eagerness to prove yourself, when you stop chasing or explaining, that's when something inside him starts to shift. He starts to wonder why. He starts to question what changed. And the more he questions, the more his mind begins to fixate on you in a way it never did before. The power of emotional unavailable is that it forces a person to self-reflect. When you were always there, always responding, always engaged, he never had to think too hard. He knew you were there, and because of that, he never truly had to process what your presence meant. But now the absence forces him to look inward. Now he has to analyze his own feelings. He has to confront the possibility that maybe he misjudged the situation. Maybe he assumed you would always be available, and now he isn't so sure. That uncertainty is what drives obsession. That is what keeps you in his mind, even when he tries to push the thoughts away. The human mind is a pattern-seeking machine. It craves consistency. When a pattern is disrupted, when what was once predictable is now uncertain, the brain works overtime trying to understand why. If he was used to receiving instant replies, affectionate messages, or emotional engagement from you, and suddenly that is no longer there, he will start to wonder. He will start to obsess. He will start to question if he made a mistake. What makes this so powerful is that it works on a subconscious level. Even if he tells himself that he doesn't care, even if he tries to distract himself, his mind will keep looping back to the same question: why isn't she reacting the way she used to? That question alone is enough to create doubt. And doubt is what leads to pursuit. Most people assume that being emotionally available will make someone appreciate them more, that showing constant care, proving their love, and being endlessly understanding will make the other person reciprocate. But that is rarely how human nature works. We do not crave what is easy. We crave what challenges us. And emotional unavailability is a challenge. It forces the other person to step up, to work for what they once took for granted. When you detach, when you stop giving unlimited access to your emotions, you change the way he perceives you. You go from someone who was always within reach to someone who now exists in a space of mystery. And mystery is intoxicating. It keeps the mind engaged. It makes someone think about you even when they don't want to. At first, he may try to convince himself that he doesn't care, that he can move on, but the mind doesn't work that way. The more he tries to ignore the shift, the more it pulls him in. Because the brain doesn't like open loops. It doesn't like unanswered questions. And the biggest question in his mind will be, what changed? That question alone is enough to create an obsession. It's what will make him check your social media when he swore he wouldn't. It's what will make him reread old conversations, trying to pinpoint where things shifted. It's what will make him start to wonder if he underestimated you, if he assumed too much, if he let something slip away that he shouldn't have. This is why emotional unavailability is so powerful. It shifts the focus. It puts you in control. Instead of you being the one wondering where you stand, now he is the one trying to figure things out. Now he is the one analyzing, overthinking, obsessing. And that shift in dynamic is what makes him realize that he can't just let you go. When you become unpredictable, he starts craving the certainty he once had. Human nature is wired to seek patterns, to find comfort in what is familiar, in what feels secure. When he thought he knew you, your reactions, your emotions, your availability, he didn't have to think twice. He didn't have to question anything because the pattern was predictable. But the moment that pattern is disrupted, the moment you become a mystery instead of a guarantee, that's when his mind starts fixating on you in ways it never did before. Predictability breeds complacency. When someone knows exactly how you'll respond, exactly how much you'll tolerate, and exactly how far they can push before you react, they don't value the connection as much. They assume you'll always be there, that they can pull you back whenever they choose. And because of that assumption, they don't feel the need to put in effort, to pursue, or to truly appreciate your presence. But the moment you change, the moment you stop giving the same reactions, the moment you start behaving in a way that is different from what he expects, everything shifts. The human brain is designed to notice change. It naturally pays more attention to things that stand out, things that feel uncertain, things that disrupt a previous pattern. If you were always the one reaching out first, if you were always the one making sure the connection stayed alive, he got used to it. He expected it. It became a part of the routine he no longer had to think about. But when that stops, when you no longer follow the same script, when your behavior no longer aligns with what he assumed, confusion sets in. And confusion breeds curiosity. He will start to wonder what happened. He will start to question why you're no longer reacting the same way. He will start paying attention in ways he never did before, because now there's a gap where certainty used to be, and gaps demand to be filled. The human brain hates uncertainty. It craves resolution. It wants to understand, to make sense of things. And when he can't easily predict your reactions anymore, he will start analyzing everything. This is where the dynamic shifts. Because the moment he starts analyzing, the moment he starts second guessing, the moment he starts wondering where he stands, he starts investing mental and emotional energy in you. That energy is what creates attachment. That energy is what makes him start to see you differently. What makes unpredictability so powerful is that it forces the other person to engage. It forces them to take action. When you always react the same way, when you always give the same responses, they don't have to put in effort. They don't have to wonder. They don't have to work for your attention. But when you change, when you break the pattern, they are left with no choice but to step up, to prove themselves, to try and figure you out. At first, he may not realize what's happening. He may brush it off, assume you're just having a bad day, assume that you'll go back to your usual self. But as time goes on and you remain unpredictable, the sense of control he once had begins to slip away. And when people feel like they're losing control over something they took for granted, they start fighting to get it back. He will start testing the waters, sending small messages just to see how you'll respond. He will try to engage in ways that feel casual, but in reality, he's checking to see if he still has access to you the way he once did. He will start watching you more closely, noticing things he never paid attention to before. And the more he notices, the more he realizes that he doesn't have you figured out anymore. That realization alone is enough to make him crave the certainty he once had. Most people assume that being predictable makes them reliable, that always being available makes them valuable. But the truth is, it often does the opposite. It makes people take you for granted. It makes them assume you'll always be there. It removes the mystery, the intrigue, the excitement that keeps someone mentally and emotionally engaged. But the moment you change, the moment you start making them question, the moment you become someone they can't easily read, everything changes. The focus shifts. Suddenly, you are no longer the one seeking reassurance. You are the one making them seek it. You are no longer the one wondering where you stand. You are the one making them wonder. That shift is what keeps you on their mind, what makes them crave what they once had but can no longer be sure of. And that craving is what makes them realize they can't just let you go. When you master emotional detachment, he will feel the void. The human mind is conditioned to respond to loss with heightened awareness. When something that was once constant is no longer there, it creates an emotional imbalance that the subconscious desperately wants to correct. This is why emotional detachment has such a powerful effect. It creates a vacuum, an absence that is impossible to ignore. At first, he may not fully grasp what is happening. He may assume that your shift in energy is temporary, that you're just in a mood, or that you will return to your usual self in time. But when you remain detached, when you no longer give him the emotional validation he once relied on, he begins to feel the void in a way that is impossible to overlook. That absence forces him to confront feelings he never had to acknowledge before. Human beings crave connection, but more importantly, they crave certainty. When someone is always available, always emotionally present, it creates a sense of stability. There is no urgency, no real reason to appreciate their presence because they are always there. But when that emotional presence is removed, when the warmth, the reassurance, the comfort is no longer freely given, the absence starts to weigh on the mind. It starts with subtle moments. He may go about his day as usual, but something feels different. The way you used to respond with enthusiasm is now replaced with neutrality. The effort you used to put into conversations is now minimal. The small, thoughtful things you used to do are no longer there. It is in these tiny shifts that the mind begins to register loss. And loss, whether it is tangible or emotional, always triggers a response. At first, he may try to ignore it. He may tell himself that it doesn't matter, that he doesn't need the same level of connection he once had. But the subconscious mind does not function on logic alone. It functions on emotion. And when a source of emotional comfort is suddenly removed, the mind fixates on it even more. He may start to replay old conversations, looking for signs of when the change began. He may start to overanalyze your actions, wondering if he did something wrong, wondering if you are slipping away. The more he tries to rationalize it, the more he realizes that he no longer feels the security he once had with you. That realization alone is enough to create emotional distress. Emotional detachment works because it shifts the balance of power. When you are always emotionally available, he didn't have to question his place in your life. He knew that no matter what, you would always respond, always engage, always be there. But when you detach, when you stop providing that certainty, he is forced to question everything. This is where the emotional impact becomes undeniable. He may try to get your attention in subtle ways, sending messages that don't necessarily ask for anything just to see how you'll respond. He may bring up old memories, trying to reignite a sense of familiarity. He may even test you, saying things to provoke a reaction, just to see if he still holds the same influence over you. These are all signs that the emotional void you created is affecting him. People don't realize how much they rely on emotional connections until those connections are no longer there. When someone is always present, always showing love, always giving reassurance, it becomes easy to take them for granted. But when that presence disappears, the mind begins to panic. It begins to crave what was once easily accessible. This is why detachment creates such a strong emotional response. It forces the other person to acknowledge just how much they depended on your presence, even if they never realized it before. He may not admit it, he may not show it outright, but he will feel it. That emptiness will linger in his mind, making him question why the dynamic has changed. The more he questions, the more he fixates. The more he fixates, the more he starts to chase. It's not because he suddenly realized your value, it's because he suddenly realized what it feels like to not have you. And that feeling is powerful enough to make him reconsider everything.